Have you ever heard of a special kind of airplane built just for missions that involve fighting against guerrilla forces? Well, it turns out there is. This observation light attack marvel featured two props that were driven by jet engines with two tails on two booms and was flown by two crew members. This aircraft was such a stud, they named it after a horse. Meet the OV-10 Bronco. Slower but more maneuverable than jets, yet faster and more versatile than helicopters. This flying horse was a legend to those who served with it, but an airplane not many know about until now. You see, the story of the Bronco isn't just the tale of a now forgotten aircraft. It's the tale of resilience, of how two Marines dreamed up their own perfect aircraft and then had it built. It's also the cousin of the A-10 Warthog. And unlike most basic aircraft, which have all their weapons in the front, the Bronco was a flying pickup truck that could drop special forces units, carry a Gatling gun in the rear, and even drop supplies. All while acting as an armed forward command post and spotter. This airplane was so good, the Marines, Air Force, and Navy used it, and the Army wished it could have. So strap in for a rodeo-like ride, because today we're going to take a look at the development of this flying equestrian marvel, its operational history from its days over the jungles of Vietnam to the deserts of Iraq, and why this twin-tailed terror should find a resurgence to perform counterinsurgencies or COIN, given today's state of world affairs. PilotPhotog.com. Picture this, it's 1960, and two Marine Corps majors, W.H. Beckett and K.P. Rice, are out in the desert brainstorming ideas for a new aircraft. They envision a small, lightweight, and rugged close air support plane that can be deployed alongside troops on the ground. In fact, they want the airplane to live in the field with the troops it's going to support. This dreamed-up aircraft would have long loiter times, turbine engines, center-mounted internal guns, and the flexibility to carry various types of ordnance. They call their concept VMA, and like many great success stories, they build a prototype in their garage. In 1961, the Air Force realized the need for an aircraft that would be suited to anti-guerrilla operations. You see, the close support role that was so effective in World War II was somewhat lost with the introduction of fast fighter jets. The Air Force envisioned an inexpensive aircraft, simple to maintain and easy to fly. Beckett and Rice create a pamphlet showcasing their concept, and it becomes a hit. Now a colonel, Beckett retires and joins North American Aircraft to help bring their idea to life. Fast forward to 1963, and the Light Armed Reconnaissance Aircraft, or LARA, specification is released. Now let me tell you, the requirements for this specification is like a wish list on steroids. The LARA is supposed to be a twin-engine, two-seater that can carry cargo, paratroopers, or stretchers, and get this, it has to operate from aircraft carriers without needing catapult launches or arrested landings. But wait, there's more. It also needs to reach speeds of at least 300 knots, have short takeoff and landing capabilities, flexible armament configurations, and be able to operate from basic forward bases with minimal maintenance. Oh, and did I mention it has to be convertible to an amphibian? Talk about a tall order. Several companies step up to the plate with their proposals, including big names like Grumman, Goodyear, Beechcraft, Douglas, Lockheed Martin, they were separate back then, and Convair. But in the end, it's the North American with their NA300 design. And while the NA300 is similar to Convair's Model 48 Charger, it officially wins the competition in 1964. The aircraft would go on to be designated the YOV-10A. This prototype, which we will eventually come to know as the OV-10 Bronco, takes its first flight on July 16, 1965. However, Convair still feels they have the better airplane, so they build a Charger aircraft prototype out of protest. And get this, Even though the Charger performs similarly and even outshines the Bronco in some areas, it unfortunately crashes in October of 1965. This puts an end to any comparisons between the two. Meanwhile, the Bronco first saw action just 3 years later in 1968 in Vietnam, and quickly established its reputation for dependability. Case in point, after a 900-mile flight from the Philippines, the first Marine Corps Broncos were flying combat missions less than 3 hours after arriving in country. And we'll dive deeper into the operational history of this airplane, but first, let's take a look at what makes the Bronco so useful. One of the first things you may notice about this unique airplane is its large canopy. On most fighters, the canopy rail is near the pilot's shoulder. On the Bronco, it's basically by the pilot's elbow. This taller canopy allows for a much greater field of view. On top of this, the canopy is curved outward so that pilots can see straight down or even underneath the airplane. This canopy design is one of the many features that showcase the Bronco has reconnaissance and observation in mind. Fortunately for the crew, the Bronco includes ejection seats, plural. Both guys can get out. Now, speaking of the back seater, there was a full set of flight controls in the back, except for the landing gear and the radio controls. As a result, some backseaters would carry an extended pointer to change radio frequencies and as a backup method in case the front seat pilot was incapacitated. So, reach out and touch controls instead of someone. Now, this backseater was typically an observer. Sometimes this could be an artillery officer, and other times even an interpreter that would communicate with foreign allied military forces. And speaking of communicating, the Bronco was all about radios and antennas. The OV-10 had UHF, VHF, FM, and high-frequency radios. This thing was an audiophile's dream. Because of all this comm equipment, the Bronco could communicate with just about anyone in the world at the time. Now, what this usually meant was artillery batteries and other aircraft, mortar platoons, ships, and even satellite communications. This basically made the OV-10 a pocket airborne command and control platform. Think of it like a mini E-2 Hawkeye or E-3 Sentry. It couldn't detect targets on radar, but it could coordinate a lot of distinct radio chatter that would normally have to go up and down the chain of command to get through to the troops on the ground or the guys shooting the artillery. We will continue the Bronco's story in a minute, but first, if you flew, worked on, or just appreciate the OV-10, then I am especially excited to announce an exclusive partnership with Thomas Gunn Miniatures. Together, we've created a limited edition series of this legendary aircraft, which has been meticulously hand-carved from mahogany and available in two distinct markings, the Vietnam era and the Desert Storm era. Each model is crafted in an impressive 1/30 scale, showcasing exquisite details, including a detailed interior cockpit. Please note, availability is extremely limited, with only 2 models produced for each era. So don't miss your chance to own a piece of aviation history with these collector-grade models. To get 5% off your order and to help me continue bringing you other aircraft, use promo code YouTube. The code is good for all aircraft and models on the Thomas Gunn site. Check them out after this video. I'll leave links in the description below. Now we move on to one of the business ends of the Bronco, the sponsons. Each sponson was designed to carry 2 M60 machine guns. You know, the one that was made famous in a movie that rhymes with Danbo. Each of these sponsons also has an ordnance rack, and this, along with a centerline hardpoint, allowed for the Bronco to carry 5 external stores, including a centerline fuel tank. There were also wing-mounted hardpoints that could carry either AIM-9 missiles or external fuel tanks. Now, the centerline station could also take a 20mm cannon. And there was another interesting mounting point for a cannon, more on that in a minute. The Bronco would typically carry rockets for attack and sidewinders for self-protection. The sidewinders could also be used to hunt enemy helicopters. Meanwhile, the rockets served multiple purposes. They could strike targets directly, or, when loaded with white phosphorus, commonly known as Willie Pete, they could mark specific locations with smoke, aiding in coordination and visibility on the battlefield. And now we get to the other business end of the Bronco, the trunk, which, like a pickup truck, had many uses. It could carry 3,200 pounds of cargo that could be airdropped, making the OV-10 an attack delivery vehicle. The twin booms and tails had many design benefits, and one of these was the fact that a 6x6 truck could back up and load supplies directly onto it. Now, this same cargo area could be used to carry up to 5 Special Forces soldiers with parachutes, making the Bronco a sort of air assault deployment platform. It could also serve as a medevac with room for 2 stretchers and a corpsman or medic. But perhaps the most interesting use of the trunk was mounting a 20mm Gatling gun out of the back. This device could be configured to fire directly forward or to the side, with a rate of fire of 750 to 1,000 rounds per minute. The pilot would aim the cannon with a specialized side-mounted fixed sight. This allows for very accurate sustained fire for ground and air targets. In the side-firing mode, the system had no problem tracking helicopters that were hovering or maneuvering. Powering the Bronco are 2 T-76 engines that put out about 745 shaft horsepower each. Originally, the air scoops were under the propeller, but it was found that this would cause debris or FOD to get sucked into the engine. So they mounted the engines upside down on the production model. This is why you see the intakes above the prop. Since the Bronco was to operate out of rough fields, the engines were covered by a clamshell housing, making it easy to work on. You could access most of the engine with just regular tools. On top of this, the engine could run on various types of fuel, from JP or jet fuel to avgas to even truck gas or MoGas. All you needed to do was change a fuel setting on the engine and the engines would run. Now, running the engines on other fuels besides JP was not ideal, and you likely had to do some maintenance afterwards, but it added another layer to the OV-10's versatility. As distinct looking as the Bronco is, no one would ever confuse it with a fast jet fighter, especially with those straight rectangular wings. Yet, those very Hershey bar wings are designed to provide maximum lift and time on station. This comes at the cost of speed. Remember, this is an observation/light attack aircraft, so it needs to be in the area as long as possible. The A-10 Warthog has a similar wing because it has a similar mission. Today, many people don't realize that the A-10's secondary mission is to direct other aircraft in attacks on ground targets, in a role known as Forward Air Controller Airborne. And when the Warthog is used in this role, it's designated the OA-10. Getting back to the Bronco, the prototype version had just a 30-foot wingspan. However, when test pilots flew it, they found the roll rate and handling were somewhat unpredictable. As a result, the production model added 5 feet of wing on each side to give the Bronco a 40-foot wingspan. For context, an F-16 has just a 33-foot wingspan, but of course a lot more engine power. And while the straight wing isn't so sexy, it is built like a tank. The OV-10 is designed for 8G performance and speeds of 350 knots. These incredibly strong wings allow it to do fighter jet-like maneuvers, which are useful for evading ground fire or going after helicopters. All this performance and firepower are great, but remember, you still have to get in and out of some very short or unimproved airfields. To handle this, the Bronco's landing gear is very tall and rugged. Each of the 3 wheels has a knuckled design, which allows it to absorb bumps or rough terrain better. To test this, the designers put the Bronco through its paces, having it land on a corrugated runway that would simulate bumpy ground that's so often seen on soft fields. Now, while extremely uncomfortable for the pilot, the Bronco was able to handle these conditions. And along with the beefy landing gear, the high wing again plays a role here, keeping the propeller arcs up high and leaving lots of clearance as the Bronco taxis, takes off, or lands. Using flaps and holding in the brakes until full power was reached, the Bronco could take off in about 800 feet. When it came to landing, it was even more impressive. Using reverse thrust, this aerial pony could land in just 200 feet. For these reasons, and this kind of performance, the Bronco was able to operate off of carrier decks without the need for a catapult to launch or an arresting hook to land. At the end of the day, the OV-10 really could live with the troops it supported in almost any field conditions imaginable. Operationally, the OV-10 Bronco initially entered service with the U.S. Marine Corps, which equipped each of its 2 observation squadrons, designated VMO, with 18 aircraft. These squadrons were made up of 9 OV-10A models and 9 OV-10D models that were adapted for night operations. We'll look at that variant in a moment. Additionally, a Marine Air Reserve Squadron was also formed. During its time with the Marines, the OV-10 primarily served as a forward air controller, or FAC, and remained in operation until 1995. Its final deployment was during Desert Storm, which unfortunately made it the last time U.S. forces experienced combat losses of the OV-10. This included 2 Marine Corps OV-10s that were shot down due to inadequate infrared countermeasures, or flares. Additionally, the aircraft's relatively slow speed made it more susceptible to anti-aircraft fire. After the Bronco's military service, forward air control duties largely transitioned to ground units that were equipped with laser designators and digital radios, as well as to the twin-seat FA-18D Hornet. Most of the retired OV-10 Broncos were transferred to civilian government agencies in the U.S., and others were sold abroad. More on that later. Now, within the scope of enhancing the OV-10's capabilities, the Marine Corps initiated the YOV-10D Night Observation Gunship System, or NOGS, program, which modified 2 OV-10As to add a turret-mounted forward-looking infrared or FLIR sensor, a laser target designator, and a turret equipped with a 20mm cannon that would align to the FLIR's aim point. Although the NOGS program was proven effective in Vietnam, insufficient funding halted further conversions. However, the initiative later evolved into the NOS OV-10D version, which kept the laser designator but did not include the gun. Like the Marines, the U.S. Air Force acquired the OV-10 Bronco mainly for forward air controller operations. The first combat-ready Air Force Bronco landed in Vietnam on July 31, 1968, as part of Operation Combat Bronco. This was to assess the aircraft's capabilities. These aircraft were assigned to the 19th Tactical Air Support Squadron at Bien Hall Air Base, let me know if I said that right, where they engaged in various FAC roles, including strike coordination and reconnaissance. The operation concluded on October 30th of 1968. Following this, the Air Force deployed additional OV-10As to various squadrons in Vietnam and Thailand, supporting significant operations like Igloo White and Prairie Fire/Daniel Boone. Notably, from 1968 to 1971, several pilots from the Royal Australian and New Zealand Air Forces flew OV-10s with the USAF. During 1969, another evaluation dubbed Misty Bronco confirmed the OV-10's effectiveness as a light strike aircraft, leading to all USAF OV-10s being armed with machine guns and authorized to use high-explosive rockets. In 1971, some Broncos received upgrades under Project Pave Nail, enhancing their night operation capabilities, which was crucial during operations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. By 1969, the USAF had received 157 OV-10s, but unfortunately lost 64 during the conflict. The aircraft were eventually phased out by the late 1980s in favor of the OA-37B and the OA-10A. The final retirement of the Bronco from the USAF occurred in 1991. However, in 2015, 2 OV-10s were temporarily reactivated to support combat missions over Iraq and Syria during Operation Inherent Resolve, demonstrating effective close air support over a short operational period. Regarding the Bronco's U.S. Navy service, in January of 1969, the Navy established Light Attack Squadron 4, or VAL-4, known as the Black Ponies. This squadron operated in Vietnam from April of 1969 until April of 1972. The Navy used the OV-10 Bronco as a light ground attack aircraft. VAL-4 was tasked with interdiction of enemy logistics and providing fire support for Marines, SEALs, and Naval Riverine Forces, or Navy forces deployed along rivers. Despite its success, the squadron lost 7 OV-10s during the conflict. VAL-4 was unique as it was the only Navy squadron to use the OV-10, and it was decommissioned shortly after the Vietnam War ended. The surviving Navy OV-10s were transferred to the Marine Corps. Additionally, in the 1970s, at least 2 Broncos served as test beds at the Naval Air Test Center at NAS Paxton River, Maryland. Aside from the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force, several nations have operated or continue to operate the OV-10. These include the Philippines, Colombia, Indonesia, Morocco, Thailand, Venezuela, and West Germany. In almost all of the cases, the OV-10 is used for coin operations or observation. But one country had an interesting use for the Bronco: West Germany. The Germans used their OV-10s to tow targets for gunnery practice. They also used their Broncos to act as flying radar decoys so that other aircraft or ground stations could practice tracking hostile aircraft. The OV-10's versatile trunk found another use as an observation post, looking similar to a World War II bomber. The Bronco really was like the Swiss Army knife of the skies. Aside from military operations, the Bronco has also been used as testbeds for NASA, by the U.S. Department of State, the Bureau of Land Management, and even as a firefighter for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. In this role, the Bronco would serve as an aerial platform to coordinate the firefighting efforts. Despite its deficiencies, in my opinion, the versatile Bronco could find uses today for the U.S. Armed Forces. And again, it's important to remember that some countries are still operating the Bronco, so it's not that far-fetched of an idea. As mentioned earlier, there was a brief resurgence of the Bronco in 2015 where it did perform well. Having an aircraft that is inexpensive to operate, can communicate with virtually anyone, can stay airborne for hours, and operate out of almost any airfield are all big advantages. There always seems to be a need for counterinsurgency operations, and there are fewer aircraft suited to coin missions than the Bronco. By giving the airplane up-to-date sensors, improved engines, and some countermeasures, the Bronco could be a viable platform for certain types of military operations. But what about drones? Couldn't drones do the same thing as an OV-10 without putting human crews at risk? The short answer is yes. However, the OV-10 could actually use drones to its advantage. A single OV-10 working with drones could patrol a large area of land or water. And to be honest, there's just no substitute for a human remaining inside the decision chain. A Bronco working with armed and sensor drones could monitor, identify, and even prosecute targets, likely more effectively than just drones being run by operators far away. The current situation in the Red Sea could be a good example. Again, there is risk involved to the crews, but maybe in certain situations it could work. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. I enjoy our discussions. I hope I've done justice to this wonderful airplane, and maybe some of you watching have learned about an aircraft you didn't know existed before this video. Hopefully, those of you who worked on or flew this incredible airplane took a trip down memory lane. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the Thomas Gun model line for some incredibly detailed aircraft. Remember, use promo code YouTube for the discount. The OV-10 Bronco, a stud of an airplane. This is Tog. Keep your eyes in the skies, and now you know. PilotPhotog.com